The first time Rowan realized love could make you homeless, he was 14. It was a quiet Sunday in late fall, one of those brittle days when the sky holds its breath and the trees stand half naked, bracing for winter. His backpack, the one with a frayed strap and a safety pin holding the zipper shut, was sitting neatly on the front porch. Next to it was a brown grocery bag with 2 sandwiches, a bottle of water, and a Bible. The door behind it was already locked. There was no fight, no shouting, no warning, just silence. The kind of silence that doesn't break, it swallows. Rowan stood there for a long time waiting for the knob to turn, for someone to shout that it was all a misunderstanding, that maybe they just needed a moment to cool down, but no one came. No one leaned out the window to cry or call his name. His mother's curtains didn't even move. What had started as a small confession, a note passed in class that said, "I think I like boys," had somehow made its way through the church youth group, then to the pastor, and finally to his parents. And that was all it took. Rowan never even got to explain that he didn't know what any of it meant yet. He just knew what he felt. But in that house, feelings didn't matter. Appearances did. And now that his didn't match the family's, they erased him. The neighbors didn't ask questions when they saw him sleeping behind the church the next night. Maybe they thought he was visiting family. Maybe they didn't care. In that town, kids weren't supposed to have problems like this, especially not boys from God-fearing households. By the end of the week, Rowan was gone, not missing. Just gone, like an embarrassing chapter. Everyone agreed to skip over. He boarded a Greyhound heading toward the nearest city, clutching $20 in a crumpled map he'd pulled from a library book. The bus driver didn't ask questions. The man in the back seat offered him a granola bar without making eye contact. The world outside his small town didn't welcome him with open arms. It just didn't push him out. For the next few years, Rowan drifted. He learned which churches would let you sleep in the back pew if you pretended to pray, which gas stations didn't chase you away if you hung around too long, which alleys were safer than others. He kept a notebook tucked in his jacket where he wrote fake names, ideas for stories, and drawings of homes he might live in. One day, homes with warm lights, quiet mornings, and no locks on the inside never looked back. But the memory of that porch, the bag, the locked door, the silence, stayed folded in his chest like a photo he couldn't tear up. It didn't make him bitter. It made him all focused. He promised himself he wouldn't just survive, he'd come back, not to beg, not to explain, but to stand on his own feet where they once shoved him to the curb. Not for revenge, just so the air could finally clear. But no one in that town would have guessed the boy they abandoned would one day return with the keys in his hand, not to knock, but to own. This is not just a story of exile, it's a story of returning. Not because they asked you to, but because you earned the right to walk through the front door without permission. Follow HeartStories for more powerful journeys like Rowan's, where pain becomes purpose and silence finds its voice. Rowan never kept a calendar, not when days felt interchangeable. Just weather and hunger, sometimes interrupted by the rare kindness of a stranger. He didn't count how many times he moved cities or how many couches he'd borrowed for a night and never returned to. What he did keep folded, deep in the lining of his jacket, was a hand-drawn sketch of a house he'd seen in a magazine once. It had ivy climbing up one side and yellow light pouring from square windows. On lonely nights, he would trace the lines with his fingertip. Not because he believed he'd ever own it, but because believing in anything else meant giving up Dallas was where the fog of his life finally started to lift. He was 17 taller now, sharper around the eyes with a voice that sounded older than his face at a community resource fair, mostly drawn by the promise of free sandwiches. Rowan met Raymond, a man in his 60s with sun-leathered skin, denim overalls, and a voice that didn't rise or fall, just existed, steady like wood grain. Raymond ran a small home restoration business. He didn't hand out charity, he offered tools. "You know how to hold a hammer?" he asked, chewing a toothpick. Rowan nodded even though he didn't. That was how it began. Rowan worked 6 days a week, sanding cabinets, painting, baseboards, hauling debris. He didn't complain, didn't ask for extra breaks. He watched everything memorize the rhythm of renovation. Raymond didn't talk much, but he paid fairly and kept a cot in the back room for Rowan to sleep on. Over time, their silence became a kind of language. Rowan learned that trust for men like them wasn't declared. It was earned through action, hour by hour, nail by nail. With the money he saved, Rowan bought his first proper set of clothes, then a used laptop, then night classes. He didn't tell anyone why he flinched every time a sermon came on the radio or why he hated the sound of certain church bells. Some stories don't need to be retold. They just needed to be rewritten. What surprised him most wasn't how quickly he adapted, but how natural it felt to build something. His hands, once numb from sleeping outside, now shaped crown molding, installed tiles, and ran wiring like second nature. He liked restoring what was broken, not because he needed control, but because he understood it. How something can be beautiful again if you strip it down, respect it, and rebuild without shame. By the time he was 21, Rowan had filed the paperwork for his own small business license. It wasn't much. Just a truck, some tools, and the name Second Chance Restorations. But to him, it was sacred. He worked relentlessly, sometimes sleeping in the truck between jobs. He still had nights when his chest tightened and memories returned uninvited. But they didn't own him anymore. Pain became background noise, there but not in charge. One afternoon, while reviewing auction listings for investment properties, his eyes landed on an address that made his blood stop. A modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet southern town defaulted on its mortgage. The photos were low resolution, but the brick was familiar. So was the broken mailbox, a small crack in the window. It was that house, the one that locked him out without a word. Rowan didn't hesitate. He called, he bid, he waited, and when the paperwork came back with his name printed clean across the top, he sat in silence for an hour, staring at it, not smiling, not angry, just still. He didn't tell Raymond. He didn't tell anyone. That piece of paper meant more than ownership. It meant closure. But part of him knew the real reckoning hadn't arrived yet. The house was his, but the ghosts were still inside, and the boy they had thrown away, he was finally coming home, not as a son, not as a sinner, not even as a survivor. As a man with the right to decide what stayed and what didn't. The drive back to that town was quiet. Rowan didn't play music. He didn't need to. Every mile closer carried its own noise, memories clanging like loose nails in an old attic. He had delayed this trip for 3 months after finalizing the sale. Told himself it was about logistics. The truth was simpler. He wasn't sure what he'd feel when he saw it again. The house hadn't changed much. The same chipped brick, the same crooked mailbox that never got fixed. It looked smaller now, like a stage set left behind after the final act. But as he stepped out of his truck and approached the front porch, his heart beat in ways he hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not grief. Something heavier, like walking into the echo of your own childhood and realizing the echo was all that's left. The front door creaked open on the second try. The air inside was stale dust, old fabric, and a silence too thick to breathe. No furniture remained. Just outlines where once a couch had been, where a cross used to hang, where a shoe rack once stood full of everyone's shoes except his. Rowan walked slowly as if the house might recoil from him. He paused in the hallway where the wallpaper peeled like molting skin. The spot where his backpack had once hung was now just a blank wall, faded in the shape of what used to be. He opened his old bedroom door. The carpet had been ripped out. The closet door leaned off its hinge, but the window was still there, cracked at the corner where he used to press his forehead and whisper into the night. He sat on the floor, knees drawn in, and stared at the ceiling. Not crying, not angry, just remembering that night he slept in the house, no bed. Just a sleeping bag, the same one he used years ago on Raymond's shop floor. The wind creaked the walls, and every groan of the wood sounded like a voice from the past asking why he came back. But Rowan wasn't here to explain anything to anyone. Over the next few weeks, he began the slow, careful work of restoration, not renovation. He didn't want to modernize the house. He wanted to witness it, to see what was still standing after all these years and what needed to go. He sanded down the banister where his mother used to rest her hand while watching him from the stairs. He patched a hole in the drywall near the dining room. His father's fist had made that one during an argument no one was allowed to talk about. Some neighbors recognized the truck parked outside. One afternoon, a woman from across the street stopped by with a casserole dish and cautious eyes. Rowan thanked her but didn't invite her in. She hesitated before saying, "I always wondered what happened to you." He didn't answer. Word got around. People talked, some out of guilt, others out of curiosity. He ignored them all. Until one morning, while scrubbing mildew from the bathroom tiles, there was a knock on the door. When he opened it, a familiar face stood on the porch. His mother, older, thinner. Hair dyed a shade too young for her face. She didn't look shocked to see him, just tired. She spoke his name like it tasted foreign. Said she was in town visiting a friend, heard a young man had bought the place. She didn't ask how he got it. She asked if she could come inside. Rowan didn't move. The silence between them stretched long enough to fill the whole house. Then softly he said, "You locked the door on me. Do you remember that?" She looked down at her shoes. "We were scared." Rowan stepped aside. She walked in like a stranger in a museum, touched nothing, looked everywhere. Her eyes lingered on the spots she must have known he'd remember. She didn't say sorry, but she didn't justify it either. Just silence again. Until she turned and asked, "Why this house after everything?" He paused. "Because it belonged to someone before me and after me. But for a while it belonged to no one. And that's when it became mine." She nodded as if that made sense. Maybe it did. When she left, she didn't ask to stay, didn't ask for help. Maybe she knew he wouldn't offer. Maybe she came just to see if the door would open. This time it had. Rowan watched her go, then closed the door gently behind her. Not to shut her out, but to finally close the chapter. The boy they left behind had returned, but he didn't come back for their approval. He came back to finish what they never could, turning that house into a home on his own terms. The renovation was nearly complete when the call came. It wasn't from a number Rowan recognized. The voice on the other end was hesitant, polite in a way that felt unnatural-like, someone trying to sound small. She introduced herself as Linda, an old neighbor from down the street, said she had something of Rowan's she'd kept all these years. A letter never opened. She didn't say who left it, only that it felt like the right time to return it. Rowan thanked her, but something in his voice must have cracked because she asked gently, "You doing okay back there?" "I'm still learning how to breathe in it," he replied. A week later, Linda came by. She was older, slower but warm in the way people get when life has softened their edges. She handed him a yellowed envelope with his name, Rowan Matthew Carter, written in a precise slanted hand. He didn't open it right away. He waited until night when the tools were packed away. The lights dimmed and the walls no longer felt like they were watching. His letter was from his grandmother. Not the one who came to Christmas, but the one who used to mail him birthday cards with $2 bills. So inside, the one who stopped visiting the house after his incident. She had written it shortly after he was forced out. "I saw your things on the porch that morning. I wanted to come get you, but I was told you'd already left. I didn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. You were always more gentle than they knew. I don't know where you've gone, but I hope the world is softer with you than they were. If you ever come back, this house will still be here, even if they're not." She had passed away 2 years after that. The house had outlived her, and now somehow it was his. Rowan left the letter on the mantel and didn't speak for the rest of the night. But the quiet wouldn't last. 2 days later, a white SUV pulled into the driveway. At first, he thought it was another curious neighbor. But when the door opened and his mother stepped out again, this time with a suitcase, he understood. She hadn't come to visit the first time. She had come to check, to calculate. And now that she'd seen what he built, she came back for more. He didn't speak as she stood on the porch and gave a rehearsed smile. "Just for a few days," she said. "I've been between places." Rowan should have said no, he didn't. Not out of forgiveness, but out of something quieter, something lonelier. A part of him still 14, still standing with a bag at his feet, still hoping someone would open a door. She moved in that night. At first she tried to play house, made coffee in the mornings, rearranged the furniture without asking. Hung a photo of her wedding day on the wall between the kitchen and hallway. Then came the little comments. "This place feels different now. It's warmer. You really should repaint this room. It used to be so lovely. You've done so much. I'm proud of you. You know, not everyone would have recovered." Rowan said nothing. He watched, he waited. Until one morning he found her on the phone in the backyard, voice sharp, confident, telling someone about the family home she was helping restore, that she'd come back just in time, that maybe if things went well, she'd stay permanently. It clicked. She wasn't living with him. She was moving herself back in, as if the past had dissolved and the house was still hers to rewrite. That night, Rowan took down the wedding photo. He sat across from her at dinner, quiet, composed. And then gently, finally, he asked, "Do you remember the boy you locked out? The one who walked until his shoes broke, who slept behind buildings, who swallowed hunger like it was punishment?" She froze. "I was that boy, and this is not your home, not anymore." He stood, took her plate, washed it in the sink. Next morning, her suitcase was on the porch like his had been once. But the door wasn't locked, it never would be again. Because Rowan didn't need to repeat what had been done, he just needed her to know the house no longer remembered her as its owner, and neither did he. The house stood quiet again. No footsteps echoing across the wooden floor. No passive remarks about curtain choices. No attempts to claim space that no longer belonged. For the first time since he bought it, Rowan could breathe without bracing. He walked room to room in the early light, letting silence be something sacred instead of something weaponized. The house didn't just feel different, it felt earned. He didn't tell anyone she had left. He didn't need to. The house spoke for itself. Every detail, every sanded edge, every beam he reinforced by hand was a sentence in the story he'd written. With calloused fingers, this was his voice now, his memory, his narrative. One no longer tangled in apology. Outside the garden had begun to grow. It was nothing grand, just a few herbs, some wildflowers, a stubborn little fig tree he found half dead at a nursery clearance sale. But it gave him purpose each morning, something alive to tend to. Something that didn't ask who he used to be, only what care he was willing to give now. Then came the letter. Not the kind with handwriting or stamps. It arrived by email from a local community center. Someone he never learned who had nominated him for a preservation project. They wanted to highlight stories of people restoring old homes with new meaning. Yours stood out. The email read, "Would you be open to sharing it?" Rowan hesitated. Not out of fear, but because for so long his identity had been tied to what was taken. And now for the first time someone was asking about what he had built. He said yes. The interview was quiet and formal, just a conversation over tea with a journalist who asked questions gently and listened without needing to fill the silence. Rowan didn't go into the darkest parts. He didn't need to. He spoke about craft, about memory, about the power of owning a space that once rejected you. He didn't say the word gay. He didn't need to. It was in every board he repaired, every light fixture. He replaced every open door that had once been shut. The article published 2 weeks later. It was simple, poetic. A photo of Rowan on the porch. Sunlight behind him, hands folded. The caption read, "He came back not to reclaim a house, but to restore his place in the world." A week after the article, he received a package. No return address. Inside was a photograph, faded but familiar. It was him, age 6, sitting on the front steps of the same house, grinning, arms around a Labrador named Toby. Taped to the back was a note. "He always belonged here." Rowan didn't cry, but he did frame the photo and place it on the mantle. Not to honor the past, but to acknowledge the boy who once sat alone and say you made it. In the following months, Rowan began offering small workshops, free sessions for teens from shelters or unstable homes. Not classes exactly, just afternoons spent learning how to patch, drywall, build shelves, plant gardens. He never asked them questions they weren't ready to answer. He only gave them tools, just like Raymond once did. And slowly the house became what it was always meant to be, not a monument to survival, but a living space of healing. One evening while watering the fig tree, Rowan looked at the porch light. It flickered once, then stayed steady. He smiled. He didn't need closure. He had created continuation. He never expected to return, but now he understood it wasn't about coming home. It was about becoming home, not for them, for himself. Have you ever returned to a place that once hurt you? Just to prove you could stand there on your own terms? Or maybe you're still building toward that moment. Tell us in the comments, what would you say to your younger self if you could walk back into the room they were pushed out of? And if Rowan's story touched something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to Heart Stories for more stories of quiet courage, chosen family, and the resilience it takes to build love. Where once there was loss, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk through the same door they shut behind you and leave it open.